Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to continue our series further on 20th century world literature. Before starting today's lecture, just wish to say few lines. गुलों में रंग भरे बादू नौ बहार चले चले भी आओ कि गुलशन का कारोबार चले. The poetry of Faiz always mesmerized us, and we always wish to learn more about Faiz and wish to talk more about Faiz, wish to read more and more poetry of Faiz. Dear friends, we would like to tell you all under our series 20th Century World Literature. Today we are going to talk on Faiz Ahmed Faiz. The topic of discussion is Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Voice of Masses. And for the discussion, we have with us in our studios Professor Anand Prakash. Professor Anand Prakash is a retired professor of English, and through him we always get in-depth knowledge on various topics. He gives us a wider view and he enlightens us to the better path, and we believe that through today's session we are going to get in-depth knowledge on life of Faiz Ahmed Faiz as well as his poetry. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Professor Anand Prakash on today's topic, then do feel free to talk to us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800110430. I repeat, our number is 1800110430. You are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture, as well as we kindly request you to ask questions relevant to the topic. And I believe we are going to get maximum calls today because we have a very interesting personality to talk on. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Geetika, for your kind words, and welcome viewers. Good morning to all of you. And as has been announced by Geetika, the discussion today would be on Faiz Ahmed Faiz. We are inching towards our own subcontinent, and in the world literature series that we are doing in this program has already covered a large number of areas of the world and languages. And today we come to South East Asia, and we will be covering outside Indian literature, because for that we have a different series. We will be covering Pakistan, we will be covering Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, China, and Japan, and Vietnam, and maybe there will be references to other countries and languages also this month. So on the 1st of this month, we have Faiz Ahmed Faiz, who was both an Indian and finally a Pakistani. He was born in 1911-1912. There is a bit of doubt about the year. I consulted books and found that in some books it was mentioned 1911, and in others it was 1912. So I thought I should give the option to you to check and to see which year it was. And he died in 1985. He was a poet who would always, be in touch with emotionally and intellectually the masses. He was the poet of the masses. Not that he would write in very simple Urdu, even though he was writing an Urdu that was elegant as well as simple, but then he also sometimes used Persian words. And those words were used because he had to, present the topic in a slightly lofty manner. And when who can be loftier than the interest of the masses? What can be loftier than the interest of the masses? So for him, in fact, masses were equivalent to, the level of God. So that way, and Faiz, you will all be interested in knowing as to what Faiz means, because his name was Faiz Ahmed, and then he also adopted the takhallus, Faiz. So why did he do it? It's a slightly religious word. Faiz is always associated with God and God's grace, God's magnanimity. That is what the meaning of Faiz is. And Faiz would not much bother about religiosity or faith, because he believed in the masses, he believed in human beings, and whatever human beings were moved by, that would be of concern for Faiz. So he is called Faiz, he is Faiz Ahmed, and he was born in Sialkot, which is undivided Punjab, which means he was a Punjabi. He knew Punjabi very well. I have in fact heard him twice or thrice, and towards the end of his presentation, he would recite some poems written in Punjabi, and he was equally, eloquent in use of the Punjabi words, and he would move, he would influence, he would inspire people in the audience who were Punjabis. So he was born in Sialkot, which is now in Pakistan, and as is there, he died in 1985 at the ripe age of 74. His early education was in Urdu, Persian, and Arabic. And when I started, looking for details about his life, then I was wondering as to why a person of his caliber and his social status did not go to England for studies, because all his contemporaries went to England for studies, and he never went to England for studies. Why so? Why have education in Urdu, Persian, and Arabic? One cannot tell, but the penchant was such. Maybe he was born in 1911 and 12, and the country was such that at the age of 10 or so, he would become aware of the climate, the political and the social climate of the country, and he would not feel inspired to study English to begin with. Later on, of course, he wrote in English, he thought in English, his English was very good. He in fact edited newspapers in English, and Pakistan Times, he was the editor of Pakistan Times in the beginning of his career. So he had that kind of level of English knowledge also, but then he did his education in Urdu, Persian, and Arabic. Urdu, of course, because that would keep him in touch with the masses, and Persian and Arabic, because they were the classical languages, giving vocabulary, giving thought, giving kind of contact with the classics of the two languages, and that would help him understand the present day myths, present day folklore better if he had this kind of knowledge of Persian and Arabic. And if you have heard his poems, if you have read his poems, then you would know that he was generously using Persian words, Persian vocabulary, and sometimes his words would be very long. For instance, even the titles of his poetry collections would be Daste Sabah and Nakshe Faryadi. These are all Persian words, and he would use them in such a manner that they became famous because of the sound pattern that they had. So his early education is in Urdu. Then he, in 1933, when he is 21 years or so, he does his MA in English, and later on in also Arabic. And these two languages are then read, studied. The literature in them is studied at the level of an expert, and he would then, refer to it again and again in his mind, and he would try to gauge and assess the value of his poetry with reference to what he had read as a young student, as a young scholar in his MA. And I made this point, stuck to education in Lahore, then going to England like his contemporaries. And why he did it? That may be in his blood, there may be in the air that he breathed, a kind of nationalism at that time. In 20s, he would be thinking of going elsewhere for studies, but he would not. And he remained stuck to his roots, stuck to his culture, stuck to the people around him, to his neighbors, to the students who would be studying along with him in the school and college. And he would talk to them in Urdu most of the time. And if the need arose, then of course he would also take to English. In 1930s, his first collection of poems, he starts writing in 1930s, but his first collection of poems is published in 1941, and that's called Nakshe Faryadi. And Nakshe Faryadi, Faryad is a remonstrance. You make a kind of complaint, that is Faryad, and Nakshe is the image. So that way, and in this poem, he's complaining. Imagine a young man of 30 talks about complaint. He starts his poetic career with the word complaint or Faryad. And why is he doing this Faryad? Faryad can be to the king, Faryad can be to a big person, Faryad can even be to God. So in a way, he's not happy with the things that he sees around him, and therefore he might talk of Faryad or complaint. And when it is published in 1941, that year I think rings a bell. 1941 is the war year. Already, the First World War, Second World War had started. First World War started in 1939, and it had been 2 years. And India was indirectly involved in the war as a colony of British. So if Britain wanted soldiers to be sent on its behalf, on her behalf, to fight on their borders in Europe, for instance, then many people would go from here. In fact, Gandhiji would talk about Indian soldiers as cannon fodder, not directly, but then there are references because these people were used as fodder of the cannons. So that way, India was directly involved in the Second World War also, because India was a colony, and maybe Faiz was disturbed by that development, and he had become in the meantime political. His political education would start sometime around the beginning of the Second World War in 1939, and every young man in a school or college, and there were very few schools and colleges in India at that time, would be talking politics in those years. And this person, Faiz, our Faiz, because he was connected with the common people, their concerns, and common people were directly and indirectly involved with the war. Prices were rising, for instance. People were losing jobs, and expenses were cut down by the Britishers on India. So all these things happened, and whatever middle class was there, that also felt the economic crunch in the war years. And if that happens, then the poet has to become disturbed, because his clients, his clientele, his readership is affected directly by the influence of the war at that time. So Naqsh-e Faryadi is the first poetry collection. The second is Daste Saba, Fingers of the Wind. Saba is the Daste Saba is wind, and Dast is hand, fingers, and this wind is actually zephyr. This is the Vasanti Bahar, zephyr. So there are two translations of this. Let me tell you a very interesting thing about this English scholar, called Victor Kiernan. Victor Kiernan was a personal friend of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and they had met in the 30s when Faiz was just starting his career as a poet, and the friendship lasted till the end. And this Victor Kiernan also edited a book, and in fact I used that book for this lecture. And he's so very involved with his poetry, and he has given poems from the 4 collections out of 7 that in all he published. I'll maybe talk about it later. But the second book that he had was Daste Saba, Fingers of the Wind, and this came in 52. The gap between the first and the second collections is 11 years. Then came in 56, after 4 years, the third collection. This was called Zindanama, and this is Prison Thoughts. Why Prison Thoughts, you might wonder? Pakistan had emerged as a free country in 1956. Pakistan, like India, was a free country in 1947, and then Faiz remained there. And 52, he would be perhaps in jail in 52 or immediately after that. And then when Zindanama came, then he had spent some time in jail, 3-4 years, and these poems belong to that phase when he was in jail, and Zindanama has those poems. Then there is a third collection that this person used, that is Daste Tahe Sang. That is, duress is the other translation, but the hand under the rock is the literal translation of Daste Tahe Sang. Sang is pathar, sang is stone, and Tahe means, of course, big, or at the under the layer of, and his hand is actually stuck under the layer of a big rock. The hand is. What does it mean? In Urdu, it's very simple. Mera haath dab gaya hai. And Daste Tahe Sang is actually a difficult construction by Faiz, but then he has to put in terms which are most of the time idea oriented. He's a poet who thinks. It's a poet who also conveys some meaning when he's angry or when he's happy. And in order to use these words, he has to think a bit more to understand the shades of these words, so that those shades start coming in his writing. So Hand Under the Rock, once again, is a title that makes us curious about why he is thinking that his hand is under the rock, why his hand is pressed by the rock, and is life as heavy as a rock, and are people feeling helpless, and why when the country has become free is Faiz feeling helpless. Personally, he may or may not feel helpless. He did, because he was fighting for the cause of the common people. But then why was he fighting? Many other people would not be fighting for the cause of the people, so nobody would bother about them. But he had to, and therefore he found that all the time he was feeling the pressure of the circumstance. Then comes Sare Wadiye Sina, and then there is Shame Sahare Yara, and then Mere Dil Mere Musafir. That's a simple title that comes. That's the last one, 1980, and 1985 he would die. And after his death, there will be many more collections, and some of the uncollected works, would also see the light of day. They'll be given in the magazines, in the journals. There'll be books about him, and in those books there will be references to all these years. So we have these collections, and you can see that everywhere in the collection there is a shadow of some kind of pain, some kind of problem, some kind of helplessness. And then he doesn't merely write poetry, he writes prose also. So there is a book called Mizan, which contains critical articles, and that has analytical comments, and he is a political person, and he would be commenting on day-to-day situations in Pakistan and in the world. And then there is a very interesting kind of book that he published. It is called Saleebe Mere Dariche Mein. And actually, Saleebe, when you have this is the prison vocabulary, and he is writing his letters to his wife, and those letters are compiled in this book, Saleebe Mere Dariche Mein. And his wife was an English lady, and imagine people in India would not like that a person would marry outside, not just the community, but outside India, outside Pakistan. But then he was in love with her, and in these matters, he would be dictated by love. He would not be dictated by tradition. All of us know that in 1930s or 40s, if somebody had to be married, then the marriage would be fixed not by the individual oneself. The marriage would be fixed by the family, and there will be a kind of pagam, going for from the man's side to the woman's side, and there will be a discussion, and then certain things will be sorted out, and finally the marriage will happen. But in the case of Faiz Ahmed Faiz, he didn't bother about that custom, that convention, and he went out of all that. He was known for breaking the rules. He was a great rule breaker, and he knew that most of the rules were anti-people, and therefore why not break those rules? And because of this reason, he had a large number of critics in Pakistan. And as I told you, he starts his career in free Pakistan as a person who is jailed. So that way you can see that there will be contentions in his life. And his wife's name is Alice, A-L-Y-S, and then there is a Matai Loho Kalam. Then he's writing ordinary simple articles, day-to-day kind of discussions, and that has lectures, articles, interviews. And he also wrote plays. He also gave interviews. He became an international figure, so to say. His reputation as a poet is almost equal to Ghalib and Iqbal. Ghalib is a great poet. There's no doubt about that. And if one has to think of a Ghalib of the 20th century, then that person would be Faiz. As difficult, as complex, as communicative, as quotable. Some of the lines of Faiz are as quotable as of any great poet, and he would not follow convention, but he would make his own path, and that thing must have helped his career to go sky high in terms of poetic appeal. He imbibed the ideas of the 1930s, says his friend Kiernan, whom I am quoting extensively in this discussion, more gradually but tenaciously. He will not learn things from the book. He will not learn things from any discourse. He will not learn things from anybody who comes and preaches to him. So gradually he will evolve as a man, as a poet. Otherwise, he is very tenacious. He sticks to his mission. He is difficult to handle, and he will, if he likes an idea, then he wouldn't bother about the consequences of adopting that idea. He is that tenacious. So he's stuck to his job, learning, he's eager to understand things, and he would get his education then from books or smuggled pamphlets. Smuggled pamphlets, why? Because he's writing in the 1930s. 1930s is a great period in India's history. All of us know about that. 1930s is a time, when Subhash Chandra Bose is very active. Gandhiji already has had the entire country in his ideological political grip. And 1930 is the period when Russia has come into being as a socialist country 13-14 years back in 1917, and Russia is a great point of inspiration for the rest of the world. And Faiz is learning his lessons in politics and in social change from these developments. And these pamphlets are coming and they are smuggled. The British government is very sure that they would not allow people to read any pamphlets, any books that would talk of freedom. And this person then would get an access to those pamphlets, and that will be his education. So he doesn't get his education from the material that is there in the curriculum in the school or college, or in the popular magazines where everything is censored because it's a colony. But he will just read his pamphlets, read his books, and travelers' tales. People are traveling from here and there. They are coming from outside. What they saw there, how they view India from there, and how when they come here, they are jolted out of their complacency, and how these people then try to assess and gauge the effects and influences of the policies that the government pursues. And then his friend Kiernan makes this slightly interesting comment about him, that he is also affected by a genii, and the genii is the spirit of the age. So there is a kind of both. There is a kind of spirit in him, spirit of the age. What does the spirit of the age mean? It's very difficult to find out the spirit of the age. You can see the ideas around you. You can see different people responding to circumstances in a particular manner. But then there is something called the spirit of the age. In 1930, what is the spirit of the age? In fact, Congress party, which was supposed to be a nationalist party till that time, it was taking the cause of India as a whole, not just of this or that region. But in the 1930s, the Congress party was becoming more and more change oriented, and even people who were earlier using the Congress party to get their gains, like the Indian ruling class, which was anti-imperialist in its own way, even they were feeling threatened by the spirit of the age, because people wanted change, people wanted a rule of their own. Policies of the government, when the country would become free, should be dictated by the needs and requirements of the masses. This was the change that was occurring, and Gandhiji himself was under pressure to become more and more change oriented. And if you know about the kind of crisis of the Congress party at that time, that within the Congress party there was a party called Congress Socialist Party, and a large number of people joined that faction of the Congress. And I don't have to go into the this political aspect of the 1930s, but then Faiz was seeing it happening in front of his eyes, that more and more people who were politically aware were then aware about the requirement of change in society at the grassroots level. And that's what Kiernan means by the spirit of the age, and this person is able to imbibe that spirit in his views as well as in his poetry. So these things, they were rooted themselves in his own soil. He saw them and their shadows by familiar sunlight during the day. The things were happening in front of his eyes on the street. He would learn from there, and they took possession of his imagination. What does a poet have? What is the most precious thing that a poet has? Definitely imagination. All of us have views and ideas. But what about imagination? What appeals to your mind at that level, where you start imagining things? The thing is not there. You start thinking about it, and you create a picture in your mind of something that will happen tomorrow. That is called imagination. Imagination is the making of an image out of your own liking. That is called imagination. So if you have an image in mind and then you want to play with that image, you want to slightly change it, give it different color to it, if you then start fantasizing about that imagined thing, okay, I like this happy scene, but this happy scene could be still better. 10 years later, and then you ask yourself, how will it be better? And then your imagination will come to your rescue and will tell you this is how it can become better. So this is what the poets do. Poets' job is to think not only about the present and about the past, but also about the future. And future can be imagined. The past can be understood, past can be read about, present can be seen. What about future? You can't say anything. So what you do is you start imagining. That is what the poet does. And this, so far as Faiz is concerned, he was gifted with this particular sense of imagination in him. So these, have a kind of stronghold on his mind. They in fact are his strongholds, which ideas are less easily dislodged. If you have those ideas in your imagination, then you can't remove them, as well as of his mind. So his mind was, so very strong at that time that whatever made its place there would remain there for some time. This is what Kiernan, the great critic of the 20th century, says about Faiz. Teaching initially in a Muslim college in Amritsar. That's what he does. He's a teacher basically. Before 1939, he had made a name for himself in literature. The war and its aftermath made room for him in political history. During the war, he had joined the military education department, and he had become a big officer there. And even the British soldiers would salute to him, because after the war was going on, and he had to be there. After independence, in 1947, when the partition happened, he continued to hope, which is very difficult. So that way, what I am doing in this lecture and in this discussion is to tell you as to how a poet is formed, and in the process of formation, how the poet is playing his role. So in fact, he is telling others, he is communicating to others his ideas and his imagined things, and in the process of communication, he is learning more. This is what I am saying in order to get at the root of his genius. His genius is being formed in front of his eyes, and in the process of sharing that genius, he in fact makes it more and more rich. So I'll be talking about his poetry. So far I've talked about the background. The background was socio-political. The background was also individual in this case, and he was a man of ideas, and all these things will finally percolate into his poetic expression, and there they will assume a form for which he is admired today. After so many years of his death, we still have a lecture. After maybe 50 years, there will be people who will be still writing more about him, because such people die only physically, in their physical sense. But so far as the ideas are concerned, at the level of ideas, they in fact become much almost immortal. How many years later, you will find a different Faiz coming up in the mind of the audience. So I'll take it up at the level of poetry and at the level of emotional responses that he captures in the second part of the lecture. Till then, let's wait.
With this note, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving us in-depth knowledge on life of Faiz. Dear friends, there is a lot more for you in store. You are just requested to be with us as we are back after a short break, and we would be discussing more on Faiz, as well as we are going to include his poetry too. Thank you for watching us. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on Faiz Ahmed Faiz, and in the previous session we discussed on life of Faiz in detail. There is a lot more for you and we are going to discuss more. In the previous session, Professor Anand Prakash rightly said at the end we should talk about the formation of the poet, and through his writings his formation could be well predicted. Friends, I would like to tell you all that Professor Anand Prakash is ready to give you more and more of insight into today's topic, that is on Faiz. So you are requested to watch this session carefully. Friends, as I already told you that we have our expert Professor Anand Prakash, who is a retired professor of English from Delhi University. He always has something interesting for you, and we believe that through this session you are learning a lot. If you have any question pertaining to today's lecture, then feel free to talk to us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800110430. I repeat, our number is 1800110430. Now I would like to welcome our guest Professor Anand Prakash once again. Hello sir, welcome to the lecture.
Thanks Geetika again, and welcome viewers to the second part of the lecture. In this part, let me begin with a question from myself. The question is, Faiz is in the middle of his career when his country becomes free, Pakistan, in 1947. And at that point of time, there is a very violent atmosphere in both India and Pakistan. The division occurred, the partition occurred on a very violent note, very destructive note. Neither were Indians happy nor were Pakistanis happy. And in fact, the two countries at that point of time were at loggerheads with each other. In such a situation, what should a poet do? The poet is a humanist. He is on the side of human beings on both sides. And he is critical of the policies of the rulers in both the countries, because it is they who are in a way allowing or the use of state to further interests of violence. That's what Pakistani people would think, that's what Indian people would think. What should a poet do in such a case? And the question is difficult to answer. The poet has to very carefully tread the path of expression. And expression becomes very fearsome. Expression becomes a it becomes a great adventure. It's very risky. It's very courageous to open one's mouth and to in fact put pen to paper at that point of time. And one event that occurred in 1948, 30th January, was that Gandhiji was murdered, was killed by an Indian, and Faiz heard about it in Pakistan, and Pakistanis were not happy at all about what Indians were doing, and Indians were not happy at all. What should Faiz do? And Faiz at that point of time, and what he did was important. What did he do? He continued to hope, as he had always done, for good relations between the two countries. In 1948, if one thinks of good relations between the two countries, then one is in fact talking sacrilege. When Gandhiji was murdered, says Kiernan, Faiz was, as a London newspaper said, the news went to England, and there the London newspaper said, and I'm quoting that, a brave enough man to fly from Lahore for Gandhi's funeral at the height of Indo-Pakistan hatred. So he flies to India and attends the funeral. Pakistanis would curse him for this, but he said no. A great man is killed in this country. He'll come and he'll keep on doing this all his life. He would fight against religious hatred, fight against religious intolerance. He would be always talking as a friend of the masses, and masses suffer a great deal at the hands of policies of the rulers in both the cases. So this is the kind of courage that the man has, courage of conviction. His poetry, in fact, is built upon this very solid foundation of affection, of togetherness, of solidarity with people across the borders. So therefore, he belongs not just to Pakistan; he belongs to the whole world. Like many poets, who are Indian and who belong to the whole world. In fact, we are doing literature called world literature for this purpose, that the world is integrated. The world now can be divided only by political and economic considerations. Otherwise, humanity is one. If something happens in an African country, if something happens in a Latin American country, if something happens in England or America, we are concerned, and we would like to take a stand on whatever happens elsewhere. So this is the crux of the series that we are running here, the world literature, and he is definitely a world poet. The person who goes against the accepted interests of his own supposed country, because he doesn't have a country. His country is the world, and this is what he did. And for that, he would not be very comfortable in Pakistan. He might have to run away from there. He might be put in the jail at that time. And as I already told you, that he was kept behind the bars in the 1950s. During the World War II, he joined the education department in the Indian Army. Indian Army means under the British, and rose to the rank of a major. He was a military officer. After the establishment of Pakistan in 1947, he was hauled up along with Sajjad Zahir in a conspiracy case and spent several years in jail. Sajjad Zahir, an Indian writer and an Indian progressive writer, the person who started what is called PWA, Progressive Writers Association. Sajjad Zahir was one of the organizers. Premchand was the author, Indian novelist, who presided over the function. And Sajjad Zahir said this, and I'm quoting Sajjad Zahir's words for that there was a conspiracy case against both. Sajjad Zahir was from India, this person was from Pakistan, and for this kind of a conspiracy case, he was jailed for many years in Pakistan. And this is what Sajjad Zahir says. The writer of these lines, that is Sajjad Zahir, was a co-accused with Faiz in this case, and he can testify to the high serenity and undaunted courage and faith in the high destiny of his beloved people, which Faiz exemplified during the whole period. He is a very honest man. He is a very simple man. He is an example for others. He is full of affection for people. And this is what Sajjad Zahir says about him, that such a man is difficult to find. Then for some time, he edits Pakistan Times, then an Urdu newspaper. He is appointed principal of a college in Lahore. And then, let's start talking about his poetry. And a poem that he wrote many years later, I think in the late 50s, and that poem, the Kiernan's collection of selection of poems, starts with this particular quartet that is 4 lines. Let's read this line in Urdu. Let's read this line in one translation, which Kiernan says romanticized transliteration. In fact, there is a way to translate Faiz. You translate line by line. You also translate the essence of it, and Kiernan has done both. So these I'll be reading these four lines first in romanticized transliteration, then I'll read them in the let me read and you will know. Last night your faded memory filled my heart. He is talking to his beloved. Last night your faded memory filled my heart, like spring's calm advent in the wilderness, like the soft desert's footfalls of the breeze. How does breeze come? It walks, and it is footfalls. And footfalls, the desert are of a different kind than on a hard surface, because the surface of the desert is very soft. And then, see the similes, like peace somehow coming to one in sickness. A sick person is generally disturbed. The sick person cannot sleep. A sick person has all the time pain somewhere, but suddenly the sick person feels happy. Why? Because he is thinking of his beloved, and when he thinks of his beloved, then he forgets about his sickness. This is one translation by Kiernan. I read it again. Last night your faded memory filled my heart, like spring's calm advent in the wilderness, like the soft desert's footfalls in the breeze of the breeze, like peace somehow coming to one in sickness. Then the second translation, which is called literal prose rendering. This is line by line. The first one was actually essential translation, but see the second one. Last night your lost memory so came into my heart, came into the heart, as spring comes in the wilderness quietly. The same lines. As the zephyr is the Basanti Hawa, as the zephyr moves slowly in the deserts. and Zephyr is a god, and if the wind is visualized as a god and the god is moving around, a god, that is Devta. If the desert on the in the desert, the zephyr is moving around, and it is the wind which is doing, as rest comes without cause to a sick man. This is the literal translation, and both translations convey something, but something is missing. What is missing? The original. In the original, the words that strike a chord in our heart, the original which creates a sensation in our heart, because we are born to our own language. This is the language we speak. It's Urdu, and it's Hindi, and it's Hindustani, and all. If the words are simple, if the words are lifted from the ordinary man's context, then of course they would appear in a different manner. After all, we are reading his poem in English translation, and howsoever close it might be, it is yet a translation. So now let me read it in the original Hindi. रात यूं दिल में तेरी खोई हुई याद आई, जैसे वीराने में चुपके से बाहर आ जाए, जैसे सहराओं में, डेजर्ट्स में, जैसे सहराओं में हौले से चले बाद नसीम. बाद नसीम is हवा, but then हौले से, this word is not there in Hindi. This word is there in the language of the street. I think in Rajasthan, in Haryana, you would have the word hole, 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 slowly. So this is not Urdu either, but this word straight away he picks up. जैसे सहराओं में हौले से चले बाद नसीम, जैसे बीमार को बेवजह करार आ जाए. Just see the cadence, just see the rhythm, just see the rhyme scheme, and you know what a great man he is. And why is he talking of beloved? This is a question I should ask. The times are of turmoil. The times are of 1950s, and he's talking about Bade Naseem giving some kind of succor to the troubled patient. Well, the essence of the poem is about the patient. Why is the patient suffering? And that is in the background, but that background is so very foregrounded that karar ana means some requirement is fulfilled, that the person is feeling better. So in fact, the person has been suffering and he feels better on one day. Now see the comment, that this kind of a subtle comment is not possible easily. Only great poets are able to create this sense of subtlety in a manner that the whole thing is in the background, and in the front there is a kind of facade, and the facade is that on that day he felt happy. What does it mean? If somebody feels happy on that day, it means that the person earlier has not been feeling good, has not been happy at all. So this is the way that Faiz is able to appeal to us. And Kiernan is to be admired for giving this kind of respect to Faiz, that he is giving two translations simultaneously of the same 4 lines, and still he wants to give the original. In fact, the book that I used, that also has the 4th version, which is the script of Persian. So there is this in Persian script he is given, in the Roman script he is given, and then there are 2 translations. So 4 times the same thing is repeated. This is the kind of commitment I wish other poets also had, but they didn't, because Faiz was a different case altogether, and people were mad after him. They madly loved him for this kind of poetry. Now I will give you another example. This is from Ali Jawad Zaidi. He has written the history of Urdu literature, and he has this to say about Faiz. He uses the word for Faiz, incisiveness. He goes deep into things. Ruthlessness, frankness. He's frank to the core. He doesn't bother about the use of words. Once the word occurs to him, howsoever harsh it may be, he'll give it in his poetry, because that is honesty. He would not like to polish the word. He would not like to make it somewhat smooth. If the word is harsh, let it be harsh. I think this lesson he has learned from his great master Ghalib in the 19th century, that if something has to be said harshly, there is no harm in saying it harshly. It's not like other poets of the 19th century, people like Dag, and Ghalib is writing in the times of Dag, but then he can also use ruthless language and in order to meet the requirements of the revolutionary urges, says Zaidi. He did not waste his energies on experimentation. Why should he experiment? He feels something simple and he uses it he presents it in simple terms, and he introduces changes in prosody, the art of composing a poem, and he can take liberties there. So he changes the art of writing, or diction is language, wherever he thought it would add to the effectiveness of his style. So he is bothered not about showing his might to the reader, but in order to convey things in a way that the reader is greatly impressed by his emotion. He has created new symbols or imbued old ones with new meaning, and has a knack of conveying the rudest, the grotesque, and the most fiery sentiment in a misty tone. Grotesque, which does not create a sense of happiness in us, or a sense of aesthetic in us, and fiery, it has to be really so very telling in its effect that the person would be almost burnt by the fire of the sentiment, and there will be a spell that will be cast on the reader, says Ali Jawad Zaidi. And I'll just translate, I'll give this thing in translation first, and then I'll read the original. Jawad has translated it in English, but let's first read the English one, and then. For a few days more, my love, just a few days. This is how the poem begins. For a few days more, my love, just a few days. We are forced to rest a while under the shadows of tyranny. No difficult word here. Yes, we may bear the hardship a little longer. It is an inheritance from our forefathers. We are helpless. These are the 4 lines. I think the whole thing is clear to us. Readers, let me read it again for your benefit. For a few days more, my love, just a few days. We are forced to rest a while under the shadow of tyranny. Yes, we may bear the hardship a little longer. It is an inheritance from our forefathers. We are helpless. Read that the line and see that there is tyranny, there is hardship, there is inheritance, and that inheritance is creating problems, and he says we are helpless. Is there a single happy word here? Why not? When the poet is talking of the times, of the problems of the times, the pressures that the time is putting on the masses, then the poet will only express this. So he is expressing this, and now let's read these lines in Hindi or Urdu. चंद ही रोज़ मेरी जान फ़कत चंद ही रोज़ जुल्म की छाँव में दम लेने पे मजबूर हैं हम चंद रोज़ और सितम सह लें तड़प लें रो लें अपने अजदाद की मीरास हैं माजूर हैं हम. So you have, would you like to say something on this?
Yes, before saying something on this, we have a caller. I think we should take the caller first, and definitely we'll be talking more on this.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello, good morning ma'am, good morning sir.
Yes, please tell your name and ask your question.
My name is Pawan.
Yes, Pawan.
Sir, my question is, if Faiz Ahmed Faiz were alive today, how would the establishment in Pakistan treat him?
Dear friend, we are not able to hear you properly. Kindly repeat the question if it is possible.
Yes ma'am, yes ma'am. If Faiz Ahmed Faiz were alive today, how would the establishment in Pakistan treat him?
Very sorry, very sorry. Could you please repeat once again? It would be easier for us.
Okay ma'am, okay. If Faiz Ahmed Faiz were alive today, how would the establishment in Pakistan treat him?
Okay, fine. This is a question. Friend will give this answer to you later on. If Faiz Ahmed Faiz would have been alive, and how would have our neighboring country Pakistan would have treated him. It's a question, but we'll talk about this question later on. Before that, I think we should talk on the poetry first.
Yes, in fact, I have already suggested the kind of response to this, and you can get it from there, Pawan. And of course, on one line, one can say that he would not be a happy person there. He would be criticizing, and he would not be, in fact, allowed to live in our country. He was all the time outside his country towards the end of his life. So you're right in asking. Poets, are not generally tolerated in their own societies. So
appreciation and criticism goes hand in hand.
Goes hand in hand, definitely. So it's a good question then, and let's get back to the argument then. And he's talking about these. I was referring to these lines in Urdu. चंद हीरोज की तो बात है, मेरी जान फ़कत चंद हीरोज, जुल्म की once again talks about जुल्म दम लेने पे मजबूर हैं हम. This he is talking about the situation in Pakistan. चंद रोज और सितम सह लें, तड़प लें, रो लें. The whole society is under the stress of pain. अपने अजदाद की मीरास हैं. We have already carried the burden of our own inheritance. माजूर हैं हम, we are helpless. So he's talking about the helplessness of people, and he's not mincing words. This is the important point. The poet is not just polishing up things so that they can be given to others as beautiful items. He is able to tell thing by its actual name. That is what his poetry is. That is what he is famous for. And if he belongs to our subcontinent, then he is our voice. He is the voice of Iran and Iraq. He is the voice of England. He is the voice of Russia, of all these countries. Wherever there is a problem, there Faiz will be remembered. So then I have just a few minutes to wind up the lecture, the discussion, and I will make this point regarding the artist, the writer, not being able to make do with the situation as it exists in his own time. And what should he do? The question as to what Faiz would have done today is an important question, and the question is answered by Kiernan again. Artists everywhere in our age, and the age itself in a vaster, more chaotic way, have faced conflicting claims of old and new. Should we preserve the old things? Should we accept the new things? These are the questions that all artists always ask, and they don't know how to answer them properly. But then they have their own answers to give, and those are idealistic answers. Those are humanistic answers. Those answers, in fact, raise more questions before us, so that we can solve the questions. We can solve the problems. In fact, artists are not supposed to solve the problems. That has to be done by other people at a different level. But the point can be made regarding the existence of a problem, and that is where Faiz is important. So claims of old and new, that's important. Present and future, each right in its way, utopia and possibility, emotion and reason, worker and intellectual, individual and society. These are the considerations that the artist always confronts. Perhaps by now we have seen enough to conclude that the artist's true function is not to identify himself too closely with one domain or the other. The writer has to look at all aspects of life, and then find an answer which is acceptable, which is to which people can agree, and which they can adopt in order to have some kind of peace and patience in their hearts and minds. So Faiz would be important for us only in the sense that he will tell us that these are the problems, and these have to be solved in a manner that they don't affect wrongly or negatively the interests of anyone in our society. And then the question raised further is, but to mediate, the artist is supposed to mediate. The artist is supposed to be just saying something in the middle, and saying in his own manner, so that it satisfies both the parties which contend with each other, or hold the balance between them. And perhaps it is in this direction that instinct and experience have guided Faiz. Faiz had both experience of 1930s, 40s and 50s, and those experiences were rich but difficult. But then he also had the instinct. Instinct means the sense that something else might occur in the meantime, and Faiz would not shut his eyes to the instinct. Most of the poets have their finger also on the prize, on the favor that they might get from the powerful people in the society. But Faiz would say instinctively that if somebody is giving me favor, then this person would like me to pay back, and therefore he will be guided not merely by experience but also by the instinct. Some of his fellow writers, says Kiernan, in India and Pakistan as elsewhere, have withdrawn into ivory towers. They have a lot of money, They have a lot of fame. People get Nobel Prize. In fact, Faiz also was named once for Nobel Prize, but somebody else was given and not Faiz. And some have made themselves mouthpieces of political leaders. You start following this or that political leader. Faiz would not do it. Some have stopped writing because writing is that very risky. Faiz's inner divisions, painful as they may have been, were a symptom rather of health than of weakness. So if you have pain, then that's a sign of health. It's not a weakness. In fact, it's poetry of pain is able to influence us greatly so that we have sleepless nights and we think about the problems that we face. Civic spirit combined with an artistic sense. Civic spirit is a good idea. That you should always know about the issues and sufferings of the people around you, and you should be civil and civic. You should be social in your approach, and you should be artistic. Artistic means you should be able to touch the raw nerve and tell people that this is where the pain is. Too strong to let him be swamped by the tidal force of a movement. So these people will remain outside the movement and will look at it from there. And if there is an inspiration, then of course they will give expression to that inspiration. So like all great and heroic movements of the revolution of the 20th century has been apt to its own cost as well as theirs to reduce individual men and women to units in the army, ciphers in its great account. This is the kind of criticism that Kiernan makes about people who compromise in life, and he is appreciative of the greatness of Faiz because Faiz would not compromise on these issues at all. Therefore, he is not supposed to be a Jacobin. In 1739, 93, there were Jacobins who would always, talk very loudly. Faiz would not talk loudly. Faiz would appeal to the senses and the finer feelings of people. And it is because of this, that in our subcontinent, we have a person who is known for softness, who is known for pain, who is known for suffering. And it is for this reason that Faiz will be remembered for a long time to come. And he will be as important for his own country as he is important for the rest of the world in general and this continent in particular. Thank you.
Well, listener, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving us a vivacious session on Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Dear friends, we believe that you might have lots of questions in mind and you feel that your question to be answered. If you feel so, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. We'll try to give answers to your questions when next time Professor Anand Prakash visits our studio. As well as you can write your feedback too. We are going to meet again very soon and would be discussing more in our series on 20th century world literature. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.
Thank you.